The US Navy desperately wants you to believe that a catastrophic 30-hour fire was simply caused by ignited laundry lint. They claim this minor accident crippled a $13 billion supercarrier while operating deep inside a highly contested war zone. But if you speak to the brave sailors who just survived a grueling, extended deployment, you will hear a terrifyingly different story. Today, we are tearing down the official narrative to reveal why the Navy is pulling its brand new flagship out of the volatile Middle East. On paper, the United States currently boasts an impressive fleet of 11 massive nuclear-powered aircraft carriers ready for global combat. In reality, we are actively fighting a complex multi-front proxy war across the globe, with a shocking total of only 2 active carrier decks. The abrupt and humiliating withdrawal of the USS Gerald R. Ford is not just about a suspicious onboard fire or some faulty steam catapults. It serves as a massive red flag, signaling a completely broken maintenance cycle and severe human exhaustion across the entire active fleet. This current crisis exposes a flawed naval strategy that has finally been stretched to its absolute breaking point by modern global conflicts. We must decode exactly what the secretive Pentagon is actively trying to hide from the public regarding this massive strategic failure. The official damage report called it a contained situation, but the fire actually took more than 30 agonizing hours to bring under control. This suspicious laundry room incident was merely the tragic final page of a very dark chapter that had silently started 9 months earlier. An incident that any older Nimitz-class carrier would have easily shrugged off suddenly became the fatal crack that broke this modern vessel. We must ask why a small fire could pull our primary siege geometry away from the most critical global naval operation seen in modern history. The truth changes everything you think you know about every single supercarrier the modern US Navy is currently planning to build next. We cannot just celebrate hardware because we must examine what happens when advanced tech hits the harsh limits imposed by physical reality. The ultimate lesson here is that raw availability will always beat theoretical capability when the actual shooting finally begins on the ocean. The advanced supercarrier was pushed dangerously far past its critically scheduled SRA, or Selected Restricted Availability maintenance window. By intentionally skipping this vital reset period, the command turned minor mechanical wear and tear into severe critical system failures. The true underlying story revolves around pushing 5,000 sailors and an untested machine past the red line of sheer human endurance. This magnificent warship did not ultimately fail because of some inherently bad technological design within its brand new launching systems. The administration actively forced a completely unseasoned platform to operate an agonizing 3 months past its safe operational limits. There is a massive operational difference between taking direct combat damage and experiencing a total systemic collapse from deep fatigue. The predictable deploy and maintain cycle exists specifically because these complex modern warships are not designed to run indefinitely. Because the geopolitical situation demanded constant presence, the USS Gerald R. Ford never received that desperately needed structural reset. The harsh reality of modern naval warfare dictates that actual physical availability always beats theoretical technological capability. The forced withdrawal from the Middle East vividly demonstrates what happens when ambitious tactical planners completely ignore logistics. Every maintenance schedule carefully written by naval engineers exists specifically to protect the crew from this exact type of ruin. The catastrophic failure was not found in the nuclear reactor, but in the fragile biological organism desperately surrounding the technology. Look at the cinematic strategic maps currently displaying the precise locations of the other 9 massive aircraft carriers in the fleet. You will immediately notice a very grim picture that completely shatters the illusion of endless American global naval supremacy. The Pentagon's desire for global force projection has finally collided with the harsh math of fleet rotational reality today. Naval logistics dictates an unbreakable rotational rule requiring 3 active carriers just to keep a single vessel deployed. One massive ship is actively holding the combat line, while the second vessel is aggressively training to relieve the deployment. The third ship is inevitably trapped inside a massive dry dock, undergoing months of critical maintenance and structural repairs. Our vivid graphics expose multiple supercarriers completely immobilized by severe supply chain issues and massive labor shortages. While politicians boldly promise overwhelming firepower across the globe, we are actually facing a catastrophic maintenance backlog. You simply cannot sustain a massive global empire when 70% of your primary strike force is sitting inside a shipyard. The complex geometry was designed to be unbreakable, but it was never actually completed before the shooting started in the region. A tactical coffin was rapidly drawn on the strategic whiteboard with 3 walls, but the harsh reality only provided 2 vessels. Operating multiple combat theaters with a critically depleted roster forces the active decks into a highly dangerous death spiral. To truly comprehend this spectacular failure, we must closely examine the devastating psychological toll on the isolated human element. Imagine forcing over 5,000 exhausted sailors to endure more than 280 relentless days trapped on the ocean. When you deliberately keep a massive crew at sea for 9 agonizing months under extreme combat stress, the system begins to fracture. Routine maintenance inevitably gets gun-decked by desperately exhausted sailors who are simply trying to survive another brutal shift. This cynical military slang perfectly describes the desperate practice of falsifying official logs when impossible demands meet reality. This harsh reality explains exactly how minor mechanical failures rapidly cascade into catastrophic operational shutdowns without warning. A simple pile of burning laundry lint becomes completely unmanageable when your entire damage control crew is severely sleep-deprived. The $13 billion internal ecosystem of the USS Gerald R. Ford did not suddenly collapse because of a sudden enemy missile strike. It suffered a total systemic failure because the vital human infrastructure holding it together was completely hollowed out from within. The undeniable truth is that no amount of advanced technology can ever compensate for a broken and severely depleted biological organism. Let us closely examine the flawed illusions surrounding the highly publicized advanced technological capabilities of this new massive vessel. The promised sortie generation rate of 270 daily flights is completely meaningless if the ship breaks down by month 6. Instead of launching planes efficiently, the highly complex digital catapult system creates a massive web of electronic vulnerabilities. Every power conversion module and complex software feedback loop depends on all the other delicate digital systems to function properly. A traditional steam catapult fails in predictable ways that a trained sailor can easily diagnose and fix with a simple heavy metal wrench. This modern digital launch system fails in terrifying cascading ways that silently propagate through the entire ship power grid at once. Under a normal deployment, the routine maintenance resets the digital clock before these severe internal failures uncontrollably compound. The clock on the USS Gerald R. Ford ran for 9 grueling months across 3 active combat theaters, without receiving a single proper reset. Nothing aboard that highly sophisticated ship was engineered to operate that long without receiving its crucially scheduled safety downtime. Launching endless jets means absolutely nothing when your core internal power distribution architecture silently burns from the deep inside. When the internal ecosystem collapses completely, the sheer number of theoretical aircraft sorties simply cannot save the combat operations. The devastating failure was not found in any specific piece of technology, but in the reckless political demands pushing the final limits. The current OPTEMPO is mathematically unsustainable for an 11-carrier fleet operating in a 2-front geopolitical landscape today. The relentless global pressure forces commanders to constantly shuffle our exhausted assets across incredibly dangerous maritime choke points. We must clearly examine the devastating geopolitical crisis, stretching the USS Gerald R. Ford far beyond any reasonable tactical limits. The ambitious Pentagon aggressively demanded simultaneous combat presence covering both the contested Mediterranean and the volatile Red Sea. This impossible strategic mandate forced a single supercarrier to absorb the heavy defensive workload meant for 2 separate combat vessels. Operating across 3 entirely distinct combat theaters without a single maintenance period will eventually shatter any modern platform. The harsh math of fleet rotational reality completely collides with the arrogant political desire for endless global force projection today. When ambitious foreign policy strictly dictates that massive warships remain permanently deployed, it guarantees a severe systemic collapse. The administration traded the long-term structural viability of its expensive asset for a temporary tactical illusion of military control. No amount of advanced weaponry can artificially bridge the massive geographical distance between 2 completely distinct active combat zones. A warship cannot be in two places at once, despite what optimistic defense contractors eagerly promise to gullible congressional committees. This brutal geopolitical awakening permanently proves that our current naval architecture lacks the true depth required for global dominance. The magnificent ship rapidly sailing across the ocean to fill this dangerous gap was ironically built to be the absolute last of its kind. USS George H.W. Bush is the 10th and final Nimitz-class supercarrier, proudly commissioned as the ultimate refined version of a legacy. She safely operates reliable steam catapults designed in 1955, easily launching jets without suffering massive cascading system failures. This proud legacy vessel finally arrives with every vital launch cell fully loaded and every single deep magazine entirely safely packed. She actively brings a fresh crew of highly trained professionals who have peacefully slept inside their own warm beds. This rested crew trained on a highly sustainable schedule that fully avoids compressing 9 long months into one single unbroken stretch. The powerful USS George H.W. Bush loudly proves that highly reliable availability will always perfectly defeat untested modern capability. This older but proven vessel wisely traded away the absolute high operational ceiling in a strategic exchange to firmly maintain the floor. With the high ceiling totally shattered in a distant shipyard, this highly reliable floor is exactly what the broken geometry needs. When the USS Gerald R. Ford abruptly abandoned the volatile Red Sea, it instantly created a massive deadly vacuum at Bab el-Mandeb. The carefully planned 3-carrier geometry completely failed because the arriving legacy ship could not possibly bridge the gap. A massive nuclear carrier strike group realistically projects an effective combat deterrence radius of roughly 500 miles. The brutal physical distance, stretching from the eastern Mediterranean down to the critical strait, is 1,800 long miles. The USS George H.W. Bush absolutely cannot hold the Mediterranean sector and simultaneously project any power near the Deep South. The aggressive Houthi forces immediately launched dangerous ballistic missiles targeting Israel, exactly when our carrier withdrew. Overwhelming naval presence provides necessary combat deterrence, while sudden strategic absence acts as an undeniable open invitation. Rebellious regional factions are actively probing the vulnerable maritime corridor, which safely manages 12% of global trade. The metaphorical tactical coffin, designed with 3 unbreakable walls, was fundamentally flawed and never completely built on time. The complex combat geometry has heavily relied on exactly 2 active supercarriers since the very beginning of Operation Epic Fury. We must carefully examine the fundamental difference between predictable mechanical failures and catastrophic digital systemic collapse. A traditional mechanical clock utilizes heavy physical gears that gracefully break in entirely predictable and easily fixable patterns. The modern digital equivalent possesses absolutely no moving parts, but relies entirely on a fragile network of intertwined components. When the internal battery finally drains after 9 months of continuous operation, the entire system instantly goes completely dark. There is absolutely no warning sound or broken physical gear to alert the exhausted crew before the sudden catastrophic failure strikes. This terrifying vulnerability perfectly explains why adding intense digital complexity becomes a fatal weakness during extended deployments. The ambitious modernization thesis, aggressively pushed by naval architects, contained a massive assumption that was never properly tested. They arrogantly assumed you could seamlessly replace reliable mechanical simplicity with highly interdependent digital network complexity. While individual electronic components may look incredibly reliable on paper, their collective behavior under combat stress remains fragile. The seemingly harmless laundry room fire vividly exposed the hidden danger of abandoning proven engineering for unproven theoretical tech. This entire geopolitical disaster serves as an incredibly expensive lesson about rushing unverified innovation into active combat theaters. While the pure technology technically held together, the delicate biological organism desperately supporting it simply could not survive. We have ultimately learned that theoretical specifications mean absolutely nothing when facing the harsh realities of physical exhaustion. The incredibly expensive war, currently being fought across the globe, is finally answering a vastly different tactical question. The ultimate strategic issue is no longer about how fast you can launch jets, but rather how long your fragile system can last. The legacy ship, actively answering that critical question, is proudly the absolute last reliable vessel built from the long past. It is actively holding together a fractured global geometry, which the future ship arrogantly helped build but could not sustain. The broken USS Gerald R. Ford will eventually be repaired, and the massive global defensive geometry will slowly close once again. But the ultimate question, which the next massive naval ship building budget has to answer honestly, is undeniably terrifying today. When you aggressively design a massive new warship for maximum technological capability, you blindly trade away human endurance. American global strategy firmly requires our massive carriers to sustain combat operations across constantly shifting timelines. The USS George H.W. Bush is bravely stepping up to proudly hold the combat line, protecting the struggling modern fleet right now. This deployment proves that decades of refined engineering can outwork untested innovation, especially when extreme pressure is on. This situation strongly begs a highly critical strategic question, focusing on the uncertain future of the U.S. Navy strike force. Should an anxious Congress permanently halt the expensive production of all the upcoming next-generation Ford-class supercarriers? Should we actually go back to rapidly building the highly reliable and incredibly battle-proven Nimitz-class warships immediately? Or are these massive systemic failures simply the unavoidable growing pains and the expected harsh cost of necessary modernization? We must aggressively debate whether the ship that attempts to do more is actually better than the ship that outlasts the enemy. Please boldly drop your detailed tactical assessment in the active comments section below this video right now to join the debate. I will carefully read them all, and I will proudly pin the absolute best strategic argument to the very top of the discussion thread.